Every pantheon from the ancient world is known to have its gods associated with death and the afterlife. Thanatos and Hades for the Greeks, Pluto for the Romans, and even Hell for the Norsemen. Similarly, Osiris is commonly described as the god of the Egyptian underworld. However, his story and his role in Egyptian mythology is much more complicated than this. As we'll see, the origins of this deity may be shrouded in mystery, but his importance throughout Egyptian history is undeniable. The word Osiris is in fact the name the Greeks gave to a god the Egyptians called Ausir or Wesir. Because the Egyptian hieroglyphs lack vowels, we can't know for sure exactly how the Egyptians pronounced his name. We also don't know for sure exactly what his name means, although it may simply mean the Mighty One, perhaps a euphemism for death. The cult of Osiris likely has roots in pre-dynastic or early dynastic Egypt, and he was initially worshipped as a vegetation god who personified the annual rebirth of the trees and plants after the Nile River's inundation. However, the earliest writings we have mentioning Osiris come from the pyramid texts of the 5th dynasty, and in these he is not associated with vegetation so much as with the king and the afterlife. During this period, Osiris seems to have gradually taken over the attributes of other funerary deities. For example, the jackal-headed god Anubis had once been considered ruler of the underworld, but Osiris would replace him in this role, and Anubis would only retain his position as the god of mummification. Throughout the 4th dynasty, a common mortuary inscription in tombs reads, "An offering the king gives Anubis." By the end of the 5th dynasty, the formula becomes, "An offering the king gives Osiris." The lesser-known funerary deities Anjeti of Busiris and Khentiamentu of Abydos would be subsumed into Osiris's character. In fact, Khentiamentu, a name which means foremost of the Westerners, would become an epithet of Osiris indicating his leadership over the spirits and demons of the underworld. The Egyptians called this place Duat, and it was believed to lie beyond the western horizon where the sun set every evening, and thus its inhabitants were referred to as Westerners. The mythological explanation for Osiris's dominion over the underworld is rather well known. Osiris was born wearing a crown and was chosen to succeed his father Geb by the sun god himself. However, Osiris had a jealous yet clever brother named Set who devised a plan to kill him. His body was then dismembered and scattered across Egypt. Osiris's sister-wife Isis gathered together his limbs and reunited them with magic. She would then conceive the child Horus with her husband, and Osiris would begin his reign over the Duat. Since Osiris died and rose again, he became a potent symbol of rebirth, which was what all Egyptians strived for after death. This cycle of life, death, and rebirth was indeed believed to be symbolized by the yearly cycle of the seasons and vegetation. Moreover, because the living king of Egypt was identified as the embodiment of the god Horus, the king's deceased father was posthumously referred to as Osiris. Essentially, kings were identifying themselves with this god in the hopes of achieving rebirth in the next life. They worked to secure this outcome through mummification and the provisioning of elaborate tombs. By the Middle Kingdom, it was believed that every deceased person would be made to stand before a tribunal of 42 assessor gods, declaring negative confessions or sins they have not committed. If they passed this stage, they would move on to the court of Osiris himself, where their heart would be weighed against a pure ostrich feather. If the heart was weighed down by wrongdoing, it would tip the scales and be devoured by the part crocodile, part lion, part hippopotamus demon Ammit, and the person in question would cease to exist. If the heart and the feather were in balance, Thoth would record the verdict and declare the deceased to be true of voice, and they would be allowed to pass into the realm of Osiris. Although the mythology surrounding Osiris is certainly fascinating, there is a bigger reason why he was such an important deity to the ancient Egyptians. Because he offered immortality to his followers, Osiris played a central role in what Egyptologists call the democratization of the afterlife, when Egyptians came to believe even ordinary people could enjoy the hereafter, rather than just the king. This change came about during the period of unrest and uncertainty following the decline of the Old Kingdom. The pyramid texts, once only the reserve of kings and queens, were distilled into the coffin texts, which were used by officials and more everyday Egyptians. These texts were a collection of spells and incantations meant to guide the deceased individual through the underworld and into the afterlife. Amulets were included in burials, like the heart scarab amulet, which was meant to keep the heart silent while it was being weighed in the court of Osiris, to prevent it from incriminating the deceased. Dead individuals were referred to with the title Osiris, and many coffins included depictions of the god's divine sisters Isis and Nephthys, again in the hopes of identifying the individual with Osiris and allowing them to be reborn. All Egyptian deities had a city or locale that they were associated with, but Osiris had multiple. Although Busiris, known to the Egyptians as Jeddu, was believed to be his birthplace and is the city where his most famous cult symbol originated, the Jed pillar, a symbol representing strength and endurance thought to be a symbolic representation of Osiris's spine, Abydos was his most important cult center. It was here that he supplanted Khenti-Amentiu and was believed to have been buried. During the Middle Kingdom, Abydos became an important pilgrimage site for the god's devotees. Wealthy believers made arrangements to be buried at this place, while others had to make do with erecting stelae. The annual festival of Koyak also took place at Abydos, celebrating the reigning king as the embodiment of Horus and the resurrection of the dead king as Osiris. By making any sort of contact with this spiritually potent location after death, individuals were again trying to secure their own rebirth. All these elements of Osiris's character were represented in his appearance. He was always depicted with either green or black skin, both of which symbolized agricultural fertility in ancient Egyptian art. He also wore a headdress called the Atef crown, a false beard, and carried a crook and flail. These accoutrements represented Osiris in his role as pharaoh and protector of order and justice. Finally, he wore a mummiform cloak, clearly emphasizing his funerary connections. Osiris's image thus concisely displays the major aspects of his characterization which were developed over the course of Egyptian history. First, as a deity associated with the cycles of the natural world, the very embodiment of the plants and vegetation which sustained ancient Egyptian civilization. Second, as representative of the pharaonic tradition, having been the country's first ruler. And finally, as a divine judge and guarantor of eternal life to the just. Much more than a simple underworld god, Osiris thus encapsulated some of the most important facets of ancient Egypt's culture and civilization.